fortunately, they did go from just the sports stuff to more local chat rooms and then more of a sexual explicit nature. Ultimately, in 1997, had my first one-night stand with someone I didn't even know her last name.
It wasn't until my kids were 5, 4, 2 years old, and 6 months that I had come to terms with Trey. I had gotten into his wallet to get some money out for something, and I found a receipt in his wallet that for some items. I think it was flowers and chocolates.
I can still hear her sobbing and just this almost a wailing, and just it ripped my heart out.
And Trey proceeded to tell me that he had over the course of 2 years, he had 7 one-night stands. And what do you do with that?
I began to learn that there is a pain that heals. You can stop.
I'm going to read a few testimonies from some ladies that are in our community that I just wanted to share with you before we get started today. When my husband disclosed his struggle to me, it hit me like a ton of bricks, and I had no idea what to do next or where to turn. He already started to make all those statements about how sorry he was and that it would never happen again. Our kids were small at the time, and I was just convinced that I had no recourse. I felt lost, abandoned, weak, broken, alone, and hopeless. I still loved him, and that made me feel even worse. With all that he had done, and as I later discovered all that he continued to do, I felt like a fragile, weak, angry, and like a crazy woman. I spent years protecting our secret, and while I really wanted my close friends to know our secret, and while I really wanted my close friends to know why my heart hurt so bad, I didn't want them to know the truth about my husband. I had become increasingly distant, frustrated, and desperate to find peace. Karen. When I learned of my husband's betrayal, I can remember just sitting at the kitchen table feeling completely numb, removed from reality, and sick to my stomach, while my 5-year-old, 3-year-old, and 10-year-old played at my feet. I felt like I was in an alternate reality. There was no way this was actually real and happening, and that maybe I would wake up and my life hadn't just been changed forever because of my husband's actions. I felt like I couldn't catch my breath, no matter how deep the breaths I took. My mind was racing, thinking of anything I could do to make the shock and the hurt go away. But there was nothing I could do but just sit in the aftermath and pile of rubble my husband made my life spiral into. Noel. When I found the pornography, I stared at it in disbelief at what I was seeing. I felt sick, shaky, numb, and exposed. What if our boys had found this? I was scared and angry. Physically, I felt like a strange tingling numbness in my face, arms, and legs. I had a headache. I had alternating waves of nausea and tears. It lasted for days. I felt very alone and scared. Afraid of being judged or abandoned, I remember thinking, this has turned my authentic life into a lie. I felt like a fraud having to walk around and pretend we were still our normal selves. Then the anger and nausea would come again. Rebecca. My husband's betrayal made me feel as though my reality was destroyed, and it was. It made me feel ignorant, small, and helpless. Your world is never the same after discovering betrayal, and the hardest part is accepting this new reality so that you can then begin to process and deal with it. The shock of the betrayal never goes away, especially as it is typically followed by more revelations. Natalie. When I discovered everything, I felt as though my world had exploded and I did not recognize any part of my surroundings. I felt exposed, extremely vulnerable, and unsafe. I felt like I was on another planet and did not speak the language. I instantly was alone, isolated, and like there was no one who I could talk to or trust. I felt unseen, unloved, like I was hemorrhaging, but no one knew. Angie. I felt like time had stopped. I felt dizzy, disoriented, and then just in total shock. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach and like I wanted to throw up. Stephanie.
All right, well that is just a tasting of the many spouses that we hear from in our recovery ministry. We are Trey and Melody Lovren, for those of you who weren't in the first session. We are from Birmingham, Alabama, Roll Tide, and we're grateful to be here with you guys here in Utah. The last session we told our story, and in this session we're going to talk about betrayal trauma. So this is really a sobering topic, and so we are, as we get into this, Melody's going to do most of this, obviously, but I do want to speak to the guys in the room because this is a very real thing, and it's actually in just the last 2 or 3 years that therapists have really been beginning to understand what betrayal trauma is all about and exactly the impact that the betrayed spouse is going through. So we're going to get into this.
Well, I wanted to open up with some of those testimonies. I have the privilege of walking with ladies every week and facilitating a recovery meeting in our local Birmingham area. And I asked them actually this past week, and a number of us have been walking together for almost 7 years. So I think when we were talking about last night at some of the dinner that we had with the speakers, that about 2,600 people were coming today, and I realized this morning when I was waking up, just praying about our time together with you all today, I was thinking, that's about how many days I've had the opportunity to walk with women, about 2,600 days. And so it's really been a privilege to do that. It's very hard at times, but it's a beautiful thing as I get to walk with a woman who feels like her life is over, to walking through this process, realizing again that God is writing her story and beginning to see her heal and carry out that process. So we want to talk a little bit about that today, but before we even get into betrayal trauma, I just want to talk a little bit about what trauma is. And I don't know what comes to your mind when you think about the word trauma, but some of the first things that come to my mind is an emergency room, a wound, somebody that is in a life-threatening situation. Not usually happy thoughts come to mind when I'm thinking about trauma. What about y'all? No? Okay. So, again, probably one of the first things that comes to my mind too is like a gunshot wound, or, I think about 9/11, things that have happened that have been very traumatic in life that we can all relate to and remember. So that's just a little bit about trauma. But as we look into trauma, and if we were to just go kind of visualize an emergency room and what is taking place in a trauma unit, and I know for me personally, I'm an aerobics instructor, so I have to get my CPR every couple of years. One of the things that we do in our CPR training is, we have to, if we're on the scene of an emergency, we have to check call care. So we have to check first that it's safe before we can do anything. And so when we're walking into an emergency room and you see the nurses, especially like a triage or an ICU, you see a protocol, you see procedures, and you see all that type of thing happening. And so we're going to talk a little bit about what trauma does, but we're also going to talk about what needs to take place so that a woman can move through this process. So, did you want to add anything?
Well, let's just define, here's from the Greek word meaning to wound or pierce, trauma, a deeply distressing or disturbing experience. And certainly this would qualify under that definition.
So betrayal trauma refers to the damage that is caused when someone experiences a betrayal in their primary relationship that damages the trust, damages the safety and the security of the bond that they have with their partner. So I want you to think about a minute. If you are in a committed covenant marital relationship with somebody, when we get married and we're walking in relationship with somebody, and the two have become one, there's almost, a lot of psychologists or a lot of counselors will talk about there's an attachment bond that's created. And it's almost like home base is safe. And because I know that home base is safe, that allows me as an individual in a relationship, it allows me to take risks, it allows me to reach my potential and all those types of things. Okay? So when betrayal trauma happens, now we've got that primary relationship, that relationship that's supposed to be the safest for me, so that if I did experience a 9/11 or I did experience something out there, the very person that I would run to for protection, for safety, is now the person that has created that. So the one person that I would run to has now created the event that now creates this avalanche of emotions, and who is safe and what is safe, and we're going to kind of talk a little bit about what that does to a woman.
Yeah, so on the screen is PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Now this is thankfully getting a lot more airtime, a lot more talked about. You've seen the military movie, American Sniper, that talks about PTSD that he suffered when he came back. And that's really where, thankfully, a lot of our war heroes are coming back who are experiencing these PTSD symptoms, are now getting the treatment that they need. But to illustrate it for our purposes today, for betrayal trauma, anybody here serve military, Afghanistan, any? Okay, so you come back, you go to war, your guard is kind of up. You know this is not going to be a day at the mall, right? I mean, you're going to a war zone. And so as a trained soldier, your guard is up. And so if these trained soldiers that have the best training in the world, they're going to these war zones, they're seeing what they see, and it's impacting them emotionally to the point they come back with this post-traumatic stress disorder that we're just now beginning to understand. Think about what we're describing, what Melody just talked about with home base being safe. Now, and I'm going to use primarily women. I know there's many men who have experienced betrayal. So for our purposes, because of our story, if it's okay with you, we're going to talk. So I don't want to discount that there are males in the room who have been betrayed. But we're probably going to be talking most of this and couching as a female that has been betrayed. I know that's not every situation, so I just put that disclaimer out there. It's just going to allow us to stick within our time frame, if that's okay. But imagine she's not going to a war zone. Her guard is not up. Again, what is supposed to be the safest, now this dramatic event happens and she's blindsided. Her defenses were not up because she didn't know they needed to be up. And so we're just now seeing from a clinical standpoint these PTSD type symptoms that women are experiencing after they find out about betrayal. Now, when there's an addict involved, and certainly that was the case in our story, an addict who is great at manipulating, great at hiding, great at this double life and all this stuff, as an addict who is manipulative and using whatever is available, if we really see this happening and all these symptoms start happening, and it's almost like she's crazy, it can mean now, and we'll get into that, this double whammy, where now we begin to point the spotlight on her because of all her crazy, what she's experiencing because of the trauma, and it's almost like it takes the spotlight off of us and what we've done. And so it's almost like a double hurt now. There's the betrayal, and then there's all the symptoms that come out of that, but we don't really understand those, and then it's just like, well, see what I'm doing? That kind of thing. So I want to spend some time later talking to the guys. So if this is your story and you've experienced this, what does it look like to give her space to go through the healing process that Melody is going to describe? But some of those PTSD symptoms, I think they'll all come up there. And forgive me, this is my pet peeve, having tons of words on a slide. But if you can give me this one exception. But we won't read through all of these, but you see a number of the symptoms of post-traumatic stress. And there's a good list there.
Well, there's a great list there, but one of the other things that I want to bring up is when this happens, and I can't tell you the countless phone calls that I hear where a woman has just found out. I mean, she's, for the most part, on the floor, trying, I refer to it sometimes, she's on the floor bleeding out, and has no idea what is next for her. It's not like we can pick her up and we can ship her off somewhere to get the help that she needs. She didn't have that luxury. That would be a luxury if she could do that. And even if she got to do that, that would be super hard. There's still carpool. There's still dirty dishes in the sink. There's still laundry. There's still work. So she does not have the luxury of getting to take a vacation to go heal from this. And so there's all these things, not only all these, there's hypervigilance, like what's he doing and what's he saying and where is he? And, there's a lot of sleeplessness, there's a lot of anxiety. And so all these things are contributing, and we're going to talk about in just a minute what is needed to get her through that. And we're also going to talk about some of the things that are out there that's only going to be more trauma to her. And so if we can kind of think of this, when a woman experiences betrayal, that we've got to get her into the ICU, we've got to get her into a triage, and we've got to stabilize and create safety for her before she can move into this healing process. And I had a counselor once, actually somebody that we still highly, I guess I would say she's probably our mentor, but we talk to her a lot. And
what she's trying to say is we still have a therapist. So.
I don't mind saying that we still have a therapist, but we still talk to her. But in the process, and she's a CSAT, she's a certified sex addiction therapist, but one of the things that we talked about as we were moving away from a codependency model and some of these things and moving into a trauma model, was she said, think about it, if a gun wound victim came into the emergency room, okay, a gunshot wound, and the gunman walked into the emergency room, who are we going to take care of first? What if everybody starts running around the person that shot the gun? That's kind of what happens a lot. She experiences this betrayal. She had no clue that it was going to happen. And now everybody is off trying to fix the addict. And she's just sitting here bleeding out. So our counselor said, that's kind of the mentality that we've got to have. She's in the ICU. We've got to tend her. We've got to stabilize and create safety and find out what it is that she needs. And that may even take a while, because she probably doesn't know what she needs. She doesn't even know who she is. She definitely doesn't know who he is in that moment. But we've got to create some safety and stabilize her, and then we can begin. And not to be ugly, but the addict can put his big boy pants on while we take care of her, okay? So right. We want to talk a little bit more about that.
Think about emotional pain. I mean, and part of my story, if you heard it this morning, I didn't really go into this much detail, but I had a very, very high pain tolerance for physical pain. Mm-hmm. I had an appendectomy that an appendix that almost ruptured because I wasn't responding like they thought I should to the pain, and almost ruptured because they took it out. But I had no tolerance for emotional pain. Mm-hmm. And that was a lot of what drove my acting out behavior. I think we're beginning to change this, but culturally, Melody used the example of a gunshot wound or gunshot victim. When there's physical trauma, man, we know what to do. If somebody's been diagnosed with cancer or some physical ailment, man, as the body of Christ, we rush to the scene, right? But when there's emotional pain, this unseen pain, which I would even say often is more deadly and more hurtful at times than physical pain, we don't do as good a job knowing how to do that. And I think certainly for the soldier example, it's like guys are just emotional stuff shouldn't bother me. It shouldn't bother me. I'm tougher than this. It shouldn't bother me. But it does. We're emotional beings. And you look at this list here, even maybe ladies who you have more permission to be emotional maybe, but even then, in our church religious background sometimes, when we're supposed to be the Proverbs 31 woman and everything's just supposed to be great and everything, we don't allow ourselves the time to heal from emotional pain. And if we had been shot or we'd been stabbed or we'd had some horrific physical accident, we wouldn't think twice about not going to the doctor. But sometimes when the emotional trauma happens, and certainly that's what we're talking about today, we don't have the same type of response to that. Somewhere along the way we get this idea that we're just supposed to get over it, and in time we'll take care of it. We did want to throw this up. Now, I am not a brain expert by any stretch of the imagination. You knew that when I introduced myself as being from Alabama, right? So, but I did want to put this slide up there because, and this is fascinating, what's happening right now with brain science, both on the addictive side, but also on the trauma side, what's going on in the brain. The amygdala down there in the bottom left, that's the fight or flight, flight, or freeze part of the brain. It's a very primal thing, and that's what's being triggered here. And so again, I'm not the brain scientist to go into all the details, but think about a lot of these responses. When Melody would respond, and even now recently, in recent months, some things will happen and it will trigger some old memories. Now, I could be, are you kidding me? Are you not past this by now? And have that kind of response. But what am I doing? I'm only casting more pain, on the situation. But to realize, yes, I caused this. And that is not something that she's waking up one morning and saying, you know what, today at 10:30, I'm going to choose to be triggered. And then I'm going to let him have it. She doesn't choose this. It's something that happens. It's again back to that fight or flight or freeze stuff. It's something that she can't control, but she's beginning to learn how to handle that herself and own that when it happens and give herself permission to feel that. But as her husband, I've got to give her permission for that. And that's where a healthy community for us as guys is so important. Because if the only safe community you have is husband and wife, when your spouse is maybe part of the unsafety, or maybe that's what's causing the trigger, you've got to have some community outside of that for safety as well. So guys, when that's happening, you need guys to call, text, and because sometimes maybe in the anger of what we feel, we need a place to vent that. Hey, this really hurt when she said this. I know where it's coming from, but it still hurt because we can't stuff it either. And that's a part of the healthy dialogue and also just the journey of recovery that hopefully we're beginning to take as couples, as he's walking his path and she's walking her path, and then finding what that couple path looks like as well.
So we want to talk a little bit about shame again, because this is such a huge part to play in the life of somebody that's struggling with pornography, and definitely in the life of a spouse who has experienced the trauma of betrayal. There's this thought process, again, we may not, it may be at a subconscious level, but if we can blame ourselves, or somehow we can take responsibility for doing this, or for this happening, then that is, then we basically can say that now we can fix this. And probably if I've not said this 5,000 times, one of the first things that I say to a lady when she walks in first is how courageous that she is, that she's found us and she's stepped into this room with us, and that she's seen and that she's heard, and we want to validate her story. But the second thing that we say is, you didn't cause this, you cannot cure this, and you can't control it. And when she can begin to let that sit in, kind of marinate in that a little bit, then we can begin, again, to kind of move through this process. Because naturally, when all this takes place, when you're blindsided by the trauma of betrayal, it's not like you quit loving your husband. You don't. So there's this trapped feeling of, I want to protect us, I want to protect our image, I love him, but then I'm like, get away, I don't like you, you created all this pain. And so there's just this emotional roller coaster that you're on. And, one day you're up, one day you're down, one day you love him, the next day you hate him. You're just all over the place. And so we're identifying these as part of the betrayal trauma. And again, we'll talk about this in just a minute, but just allowing yourself to feel those things. But shame, again, is where I believe the enemy really wants to come in and say, see, you did this. If you were skinny, Trey mentioned the Tiger Woods this morning. If you're skinnier, if you had sex more, if you did this, if you did that, then this wouldn't have happened. And the reality is, you didn't cause this, you can't control this, and you cannot cure this. Now, there are things that you can do. You can't control the decisions of somebody else, but you can make decisions on what you're going to do about it. And that's where we want to empower women, is what can you do now? We can't rewrite history, but we can begin writing history. So
here's our definition again from Renee Brown. If you were here in our earlier talk, we went over this, but I think it does play a big part in this as well. She defines shame as the intensely painful feeling that we are unworthy of love and belonging. And I want to speak to the men real quick to understand, first of all, we will never fully understand what betrayal trauma feels like. And so definitely do not say, I know what you feel, or I know how you feel. Because unless you've been betrayed, you don't. What I would say are things like, I can't imagine what that's like. Even today, I can't imagine what it's like for me to have created such an unsafe environment that even things 10 years later, 15 years later, still trigger you. I'm so sorry. And just begin to speak into that, because when we begin to understand the wounded little girl that's inside of our spouse, and sometimes I'm coaching men all the time, and they're calling up, I can't believe what she said, and they're just railing, and I'm listening to what they're saying, but I'm trying to help them look past the darts that are flying, because there's an anger part of this, right? And to begin to dip beneath the surface and connect with her heart that is breaking beneath the surface. Because if we spend our time here at the surface, and in her anger, she's doing things that are quote unquote unchristlike. And after we got divorced, there were plenty of things that Melody was sending my way. And she said she didn't have to be the Proverbs 31, she didn't have to, all that submission and all that stuff. And so she was letting me have it, and she felt very justified in that after our divorce. And thankfully, I had a great mentor who helped me, because I could have gone tit for tat, and I could have called her out on some of the things that she was saying or doing that technically were not very Christ-like and loving, and she wasn't treating me like a brother in Christ or anything like that. And I could have gone all holier than thou, because I knew I caused this. I caused this issue. And so, guys, it's one thing to create it, but we can make it worse if after the detonation of the bomb, we're still playing this tit-for-tat game. And so as you hear all this stuff that's going on, the best way I can describe it is learn to be a student of your wife and learn and even maybe pray, God, help me to see and discern the wounded little girl that is standing in front of me. Because there's a wounded little boy and a wounded little girl in all of us. And sometimes that fight, flight, or freeze stuff that we're talking about, that stuff that we're, the symptomatic stuff may be easy to say, well, that wasn't right. I'm going to call my pastor. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. But to realize, you know what? I created a lot of that. I created that fear. I created that home base, as Melody was telling you, is no longer safe. And guys, honestly, some of that is part of the consequences of what we've done. And so again, it doesn't make right maybe what's coming, but to be able, we can make it worse if we go into this tit for tat thing. See, to get real quickly in marriage, we define marriage today not as two people trying to outperform each other in this tit for tat. Your marriage will be forever changed if you go into a place where now marriage is two people trying to out-repent each other instead of outperform each other. You want to dynamically change your marriage? Start that. And now you, husbands or wife, what would it feel like if you became the chief repenter in your home? And so that begins, and so guys, I'm really talking to us right now, because yes, we could make it all about, can you believe what she's saying, whatever, and we want to kind of level the playing field and minimize maybe what we've done, and that's natural, but it's not helping this healing. It can actually compound the problem and delay her recovery.
So we want to talk a little bit more about this. I think this is a Melody made-up word. So
it's a Southern word.
Y'all can use this. I kind of made it up. But instead of kind of saying a double betrayal, which happens a lot, where a wife has reached out or a spouse has reached out, and she has been suffering in silence for a long time, because it's like, who do I tell? And I mean, will anybody even believe me when I say this? All those things that she's thinking. As well as, who is this person I'm married to and all that, trying to find some sense of safety, some sense of somebody who can help her. And when she finally comes out and shares that, so if you're not somebody that struggles in here, or you're not a spouse and you're a friend, listen closely, because just being able to hear her can change her world. And the double whammy a lot of times is, I've had a spouse call me who finally got the courage to go to her church and to share with her pastor or her priest or whatever that is.